The fluorescent lights in conference room hummed with that annoying frequency that always made my teeth ache during long meetings. I had been sitting there for what felt like an eternity, watching Patricia Williams from HR shuffle through a stack of papers with the kind of deliberate slowness that screamed trouble. The Seattle rain pattered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our 32nd floor office, creating rivulets that distorted the Space Needle in the distance. "Listen, there's no easy way to say this," Patricia began, her voice carrying that practiced tone of forced sympathy that HR representatives master in their first week on the job. She was wearing her usual navy blazer and pearl earrings, the uniform of corporate executioners everywhere. "We've received some concerning reports about your conduct with the Morrison Industries account." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. Morrison Industries. The biggest deal I'd ever worked on. 3 years of relationship building, countless late nights, and more red-eye flights to their Chicago headquarters than I cared to count. The deal that was supposed to make my career at Pinnacle Solutions. "What kind of reports?" I asked, setting the cup down with more force than necessary. The sound echoed in the sterile room. Patricia's eyes darted away from mine, focusing instead on the papers in front of her. Outside, I could hear the distant hum of traffic from Pike Street, the sounds of a city going about its business while my world was apparently falling apart. "There have been allegations of inappropriate expense reporting and unprofessional behavior during client meetings," she continued, her words hitting me like physical blows. "The accounting department flagged several receipts from your trips to Chicago, and Mr. Morrison himself called to express concerns about your conduct during the presentation last week." I felt the blood drain from my face. The presentation. The one where I'd spent 6 months preparing, where I'd outlined a comprehensive digital transformation strategy that would revolutionize Morrison's entire supply chain. The presentation that had gone flawlessly, or so I thought. "That's impossible," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The presentation went perfectly. Mr. Morrison shook my hand afterward and said it was exactly what they'd been looking for." Patricia pulled out a manila folder, the kind that always contained career-ending documentation. "We have documented evidence of inflated meal expenses, unauthorized first-class upgrades, and according to Mr. Morrison, you made several inappropriate comments about their female executives during the presentation." The room felt like it was spinning. I gripped the edge of the conference table, my knuckles turning white. Through the window, I could see construction workers on a nearby building, their orange hard hats bright against the gray Seattle sky. Normal people doing normal work, completely unaware that someone's life was imploding just a few hundred feet away. "This is insane," I managed to say. "I've never made inappropriate comments about anyone. And those expenses were all legitimate business costs. I have receipts, explanations, everything." But Patricia was already standing up, smoothing down her skirt with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "The decision has been made. We're terminating your employment effective immediately. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings, and then you'll need to surrender your access card and company phone." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. 6 years at Pinnacle Solutions. 6 years of building relationships, exceeding quotas and climbing the corporate ladder. All ending in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. Who made this decision? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "This comes from the top," Patricia replied, avoiding my eyes. "Mr. Hamilton himself reviewed the evidence and felt this was the appropriate action. Jonathan Hamilton. My direct supervisor and the VP of Client Relations. The man who had recruited me from our competitor 3 years ago with promises of partnership opportunities and unlimited growth potential. The same man who had been increasingly cold toward me ever since I'd started gaining recognition for my work with Morrison Industries. As if summoned by our conversation, Hamilton himself appeared in the doorway. He was wearing his signature charcoal suit and red tie, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. At 55, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no, who had built his career on the backs of people like me. "I'm sorry it came to this," he said, though his tone suggested anything but regret. "But we simply can't tolerate this kind of behavior at Pinnacle. Our reputation is everything in this business." I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. The Seattle skyline stretched out behind Hamilton, a backdrop of glass and steel that had once represented opportunity and ambition. Now it looked cold and unforgiving. "Jonathan, you know me," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I've never done anything inappropriate. This doesn't make sense." He shrugged, a gesture that seemed to dismiss 6 years of loyalty and hard work. "The evidence speaks for itself. I'll walk you to your desk." The walk through the office felt like a death march. My colleagues, people I'd shared drinks with after successful deals, people I'd covered for during busy periods, all avoided eye contact as I passed their cubicles. The clicking of keyboards seemed unusually loud, punctuated by the occasional whispered conversation that stopped abruptly as I approached. My desk sat in the corner of the sales floor, next to a window that overlooked Elliott Bay. I had fought for that spot when I was promoted to senior account manager, arguing that the natural light helped me think more clearly during long phone calls with clients. Now, as I packed my few personal belongings into a cardboard box that security had provided, it felt more like a prison. The security guard, a kind-looking man in his 60s named Frank, stood nearby with an apologetic expression. I chatted with him countless times in the elevator, heard stories about his grandchildren, his weekend fishing trips to Lake Washington. Now he was here to make sure I didn't steal anything on my way out. "This is all wrong, Frank," I said quietly as I placed my framed photo of Mount Rainier into the box. It was a picture I'd taken during a hiking trip last summer, back when life seemed simpler. "I know, kid," he replied, his voice barely audible. "I've been doing this for 20 years and the good ones always get the raw deal." I pulled out my laptop, the one that contained 3 years of relationship building with Morrison Industries. 3 years of detailed notes, presentation drafts, and strategic planning documents. My life's work reduced to corporate property. Hamilton appeared beside my desk, holding out his hand. "I'll need your access card and company phone." I handed them over without a word, feeling like I was surrendering pieces of my identity. The access card that had granted me entry to the building every morning for 6 years, the phone that had been my lifeline to clients across the country. "Your final paycheck will be direct deposited on the usual schedule," Hamilton said, his tone businesslike and detached. "And of course, you'll be required to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding any proprietary information." As we walked toward the elevator, I could feel the eyes of my former colleagues burning into my back. The elevator ride to the ground floor felt endless, the numbers counting down like a countdown to the end of my career. When the doors opened in the lobby, I was greeted by the familiar sight of busy professionals rushing to their morning meetings, completely oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded upstairs. The Seattle morning air was crisp and clean as I stepped onto the sidewalk, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the office I'd just left. People hurried past me on their way to work, clutching coffee cups and checking their phones, living their normal lives while mine had just been turned upside down. I stood there for a moment, holding my cardboard box of personal belongings, watching the city wake up around me. The Space Needle gleamed in the distance, a symbol of innovation and progress that suddenly felt mocking. 6 years of my life, gone in the span of an hour. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Not my company phone, which was now in Hamilton's possession, but my personal cell. The number on the screen made my heart skip a beat. Morrison Industries. I stared at my phone for 3 rings before finally answering, my thumb hesitating over the screen. Standing on the busy Seattle sidewalk with my career in ruins, the last thing I expected was a call from the client that had supposedly complained about my behavior. "Hello, this is," I started, then realized I no longer worked for Pinnacle Solutions. "This is speaking." "Thank God I reached you," came the familiar voice of Robert Morrison, CEO of Morrison Industries. His Chicago accent was thick with what sounded like panic. "I've been trying to call your office all morning, but they keep giving me the runaround." I shifted the cardboard box to my hip, feeling the morning crowd of Seattle commuters flow around me like water around a stone. A bus rumbled past, belching diesel exhaust that mixed with the salt air from Elliott Bay. "Mr. Morrison, I'm actually no longer with Pinnacle Solutions as of this morning," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "Is there something I can help you with?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. In the background, I could hear the sounds of what I knew to be Morrison's corner office in downtown Chicago, the distant hum of traffic from Michigan Avenue, the muffled voices of his assistant screening calls. "What do you mean you're no longer with Pinnacle?" he asked, his voice sharp with confusion. "We have a meeting scheduled for this afternoon to finalize the contract details." My heart started pounding. "Sir, I was terminated this morning. According to my former employer, you called to complain about my conduct during last week's presentation." "I did what?" Morrison's voice rose several octaves. "That's completely false. I never called anyone at Pinnacle to complain about anything. In fact, I was calling this morning to specifically request that you be the primary point of contact for our account going forward." The sidewalk seemed to tilt beneath my feet. A group of tourists walked past, chattering excitedly about their planned visit to Pike Place Market, completely oblivious to the bombshell that had just exploded in my ear. "Mr. Morrison, Are you absolutely certain about this? I asked, though I could already feel the pieces of a larger puzzle starting to fall into place. Listen to me very carefully, Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had built a billion-dollar company from scratch. Your presentation last week was the most comprehensive and innovative proposal we've received in 5 years. My board of directors unanimously approved moving forward with Pinnacle Solutions specifically because of your work. I leaned against the glass facade of a nearby Starbucks, watching through the window as baristas moved with practiced efficiency, creating complicated coffee drinks for customers who had no idea that someone's entire worldview was being reconstructed just feet away. There's more, Morrison continued. I specifically told my assistant to call Pinnacle and arrange a meeting with you this afternoon to discuss implementation timelines. We're ready to sign a 3-year contract worth $12 million, but I insisted that you be the account manager. $12 million. The largest deal in Pinnacle Solutions history. The kind of contract that would make headlines in the industry trade publications and set someone up for a partnership track. Mr. Morrison, there's something very wrong here, I said, my mind racing. I was told that you complained about inappropriate comments I allegedly made about your female executives. Morrison's laugh was sharp and humorless. That's ridiculous. First of all, 3 of my 5 board members are women, including my daughter who serves as our chief operating officer. Second, your presentation was nothing but professional. You treated everyone in that room with respect and demonstrated a deep understanding of our company culture. A delivery truck rumbled past, its diesel engine drowning out the sounds of morning traffic for a moment. When the noise faded, I could hear Morrison taking a deep breath on the other end of the line. Something's not right here, he continued. I'm going to call Pinnacle right now and get to the bottom of this. We have too much invested in this relationship to let some kind of miscommunication derail it. Mr. Morrison, before you do that, there's something you should know, I said, glancing up at the Pinnacle Solutions building towering above me. I believe this might not be a miscommunication. I think someone at Pinnacle deliberately sabotaged my employment. What makes you say that? I took a deep breath, tasting the salt air mixed with coffee and car exhaust. The person who terminated me this morning was Jonathan Hamilton, my direct supervisor. He's been increasingly hostile toward me ever since I started working on your account. I think he saw the success of this deal as a threat to his own position. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was cold and calculating. Hamilton. Short guy, silver hair, thinks he's God's gift to corporate America? That's him. I remember him now. He was at the initial meeting 6 months ago, the one where we first discussed the project scope. Arrogant, condescending, spent the whole time talking over you and the other team members. I specifically requested that he not be involved in any future meetings. The pieces were clicking into place now. Hamilton had been furious when Morrison requested that I handle the account directly. He'd made several snide comments about junior staff overstepping their boundaries, and had insisted on reviewing every document I prepared for Morrison Industries. Mr. Morrison, what exactly do you want to do about this? I asked. Here's what's going to happen, Morrison said, his voice carrying the decisiveness that had made him successful. I'm calling Pinnacle in exactly 1 hour. I'm going to speak directly with the CEO and tell them that Morrison Industries will not sign any contract unless you are reinstated immediately and made the primary account manager. My heart was racing. Sir, I appreciate that, but I'm not sure they'll listen. Oh, they'll listen, Morrison said with grim satisfaction. $12 million has a way of making people very attentive. And if they refuse, well, there are plenty of other consulting firms in Seattle who would be happy to have both you and our business. A group of office workers walked past, probably heading to their morning meetings, carrying their coffee cups and discussing weekend plans. Normal people living normal lives, while I stood on the sidewalk watching my career potentially resurrect itself in the span of a single phone call. There's one more thing, Morrison added. I want you to document everything that happened this morning. Every conversation, every accusation, every piece of so-called evidence they presented. We're going to need a complete record of this situation. Already on it, I said, pulling out my personal notebook where I'd been jotting down details during our conversation. But Mr. Morrison, what if they refuse to reinstate me? Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But trust me, when Pinnacle's CEO realizes that his company is about to lose its biggest contract ever because one of his VPs decided to play office politics, heads are going to roll. After hanging up, I stood there for several minutes, watching the Seattle morning unfold around me. The sun was beginning to break through the typical cloud cover, casting long shadows between the downtown buildings. People continued to stream past me, heading to jobs that suddenly seemed infinitely more secure than anything I'd ever experienced. I walked to a nearby coffee shop, one of those independent places that Seattle was famous for, with mismatched furniture and local art covering the walls. The barista, a young woman with colorful tattoos covering her arms, greeted me with genuine warmth as I ordered a large black coffee. "Rough morning?" she asked, nodding toward the cardboard box I was carrying. "You could say that," I replied. "But it might be about to get interesting." I found a table near the window and opened my notebook, beginning to write down every detail I could remember about the morning's events. The time I'd arrived at the office, the exact words Patricia had used, Hamilton's expressions, the specific accusations that had been made. As I wrote, I couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. Hamilton had tried to destroy my career by stealing credit for my work, only to discover that the client valued my contributions too much to let me go. He'd underestimated both Morrison's integrity and the strength of the relationship I'd built over 3 years of honest, dedicated service. My phone buzzed with a text message from my former colleague Lisa. "What happened?" "Hamilton just called an emergency meeting. Everyone's talking." I smiled grimly as I typed back, "Just wait. Things are about to get very interesting at Pinnacle Solutions." The coffee was strong and bitter, perfect for the situation I found myself in. Outside, Seattle continued its daily rhythm, but I could feel something shifting, like the moment before a major storm when the air becomes charged with electricity. Hamilton had made a serious mistake, and Morrison Industries was about to make him pay for it. All I had to do was wait for the phone to ring. The call came exactly 63 minutes later, while I was still sitting in the coffee shop, nursing my second cup and watching office workers hurry past the rain-streaked windows. The number on my phone's display made me sit up straighter. Pinnacle Solutions main line. "This is me speaking. This is Margaret Chin, CEO of Pinnacle Solutions." Her voice was crisp, professional, and barely contained what sounded like barely controlled fury. "I need to see you in my office immediately. Margaret Chin." I'd only met the CEO twice in my 6 years at the company. Once during my initial interview process and again at the company Christmas party 2 years ago. She was known for her sharp intellect, her intolerance for corporate politics, and her reputation for making decisions based on data rather than emotion. "Miss Chin, I was terminated this morning and escorted from the building," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm not sure I'm allowed back on the premises." "You're allowed," she said curtly. "Security has been notified. Be here in 20 minutes. The line went dead. I gathered my belongings and stepped back out into the Seattle morning. The rain had intensified, turning the city streets into rivers of reflected neon and headlights. I pulled up the hood of my jacket and started the 6-block walk back to Pinnacle Solutions, my cardboard box tucked under my arm like some kind of corporate security blanket. The lobby of our building looked exactly the same as it had 2 hours earlier, but everything felt different. Frank, the security guard who had escorted me out, looked surprised to see me walking through the revolving door. "Back already?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Apparently," I replied. "Miss Chen wants to see me." Frank's eyebrows shot up. In 20 years of working building security, he'd probably never seen someone return on the same day they were fired, especially not to meet with the CEO. He handed me a temporary visitor's badge and gestured toward the elevator. "Good luck, kid," he said quietly. The elevator ride to the 45th floor felt longer than usual. I'd never been to the executive level before. My previous meetings with Chen had taken place in conference rooms on lower floors. When the doors opened, I was greeted by a receptionist who clearly had been expecting me. "Miss Chen is waiting for you in her office," she said, her tone suggesting that keeping the CEO waiting was not advisable. Chen's office was a study in understated power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. The furniture was modern but not flashy. A clean-lined desk, 2 leather chairs, and a small conference table that could seat 6 people. The walls were decorated with awards and photos from various industry events, but nothing ostentatious. Chen herself was standing at the windows when I entered, her back to the door. She was smaller than I remembered, probably no more than 5'4", but her presence filled the room. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she was wearing a charcoal gray business suit that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. "Sit down," she said without turning around. I chose one of the leather chairs facing her desk and waited. Through the windows, I could see ferries crossing the bay, carrying commuters and tourists between Seattle and the various islands that dotted Puget Sound. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware of the corporate drama unfolding in the office tower above them. Chin turned around and fixed me with a stare that could have cut glass. She was probably 50 years old, with the kind of sharp features that suggested she didn't suffer fools gladly. In her hands, she held a manila folder that looked suspiciously similar to the one Patricia Williams had shown me earlier. "I just got off the phone with Robert Morrison," she said, settling into the chair behind her desk. "He had some very interesting things to say about your termination this morning." "I imagine he did," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. Chin opened the folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. "According to the documentation prepared by Jonathan Hamilton and HR, you were terminated for expense account fraud and inappropriate conduct during client meetings. Specifically, you allegedly made sexist comments about Morrison Industries' female executives." She set the papers on her desk and leaned back in her chair. "The problem is Robert Morrison says none of that is true. In fact, he says he never called our office to complain about anything, and he specifically requested that you be the primary contact for their account going forward." I nodded but said nothing. In situations like this, it was usually better to let the other person do the talking. "So I did some digging," Chin continued. "I pulled the phone records for Morrison Industries. Do you know what I found? I'm guessing no calls complaining about my conduct." "Exactly. No calls at all, in fact, until this morning when Morrison called looking for you." Chen's eyes narrowed. "So either Robert Morrison is lying, which seems unlikely given that he's threatening to take his $12 million contract elsewhere, or someone in my company fabricated evidence to justify your termination." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out another folder, this one much thicker. "I also pulled your personnel file. 6 years of exemplary performance reviews. Multiple awards for client relationship management. 0 complaints or disciplinary actions. And then suddenly, overnight, you become a problem employee who needs to be terminated immediately." The rain continued to patter against the windows, creating a rhythmic backdrop to our conversation. I could see people on the street below, tiny figures hurrying between buildings with their umbrellas and raincoats, going about their daily business while I sat in the CEO's office watching my career potentially rebuild itself. "There's something else," Chin said, her voice taking on an even harder edge. "I had a conversation with Patricia Williams about the evidence Hamilton provided for your termination. When I pressed her for specifics, she became very uncomfortable. It seems the documentation was prepared entirely by Hamilton's office, with no independent verification." She stood up and walked back to the windows, her reflection ghost-like in the rain-streaked glass. "I've been CEO of this company for 8 years. I've seen every kind of office politics, every type of corporate sabotage, every variation of ambitious employees trying to eliminate their competition. But this is particularly brazen even by those standards." "What do you think happened?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. Chin turned back to face me. "I think Jonathan Hamilton saw your success with the Morrison account as a threat to his own position. I think he realized that landing the biggest contract in company history would likely result in a significant promotion for you, possibly putting you in direct competition with him for future advancement." She sat back down at her desk and pulled out one more document. "So he fabricated evidence to justify your termination, planning to take credit for your work with Morrison Industries. The only problem is he underestimated the strength of the relationship you'd built with the client." My heart was pounding, but I tried to keep my expression neutral. "What happens now?" Now we have a serious problem. Morrison Industries is refusing to sign their contract unless you're reinstated and made the primary account manager. Hamilton has put this company in an impossible position." Chin leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. "So I have a choice to make. I can reinstate you and deal with Hamilton later, or I can let our biggest client walk away and try to explain to the board of directors why we lost $12 million because of office politics." The choice seemed obvious to me, but I'd learned enough about corporate dynamics over the years to know that obvious choices weren't always the ones that got made. "There's one more complication," Chin continued. "Hamilton is scheduled to retire next year. He's been positioning himself for a consulting arrangement with the company, which would be very lucrative for him. Losing the Morrison account would essentially end those negotiations." She stood up again and began pacing behind her desk. "But if I reinstate you and Hamilton discovers that Morrison specifically requested you as the account manager, he'll know that his scheme backfired. That could make things very uncomfortable for you going forward." I thought about that for a moment. Working at a company where your former supervisor knew you had cost him millions of dollars and potentially destroyed his retirement plans would indeed be uncomfortable. On the other hand, I needed the job and more importantly, I needed my professional reputation restored. Miss Chin, I appreciate the difficult position you're in, I said finally. But I can't control Hamilton's reactions or his future behavior. All I can control is my own professional conduct and my commitment to serving our clients. She stopped pacing and looked at me with what might have been the ghost of a smile. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Chin walked around her desk and extended her hand. Welcome back to Pinnacle Solutions. Your termination is hereby reversed, and you're being promoted to Senior Director of Client Relations, effective immediately. You'll report directly to me rather than through Hamilton's department. I stood up and shook her hand, feeling like I was in some kind of surreal dream. 2 hours ago, I'd been escorted out of the building with my career in ruins. Now I was being promoted and given direct access to the CEO. There are conditions, Chin continued. First, you'll need to sign an updated confidentiality agreement regarding this situation. Second, you'll be working directly with Morrison Industries to ensure their complete satisfaction with our services. And third, you'll be helping me conduct a full review of Hamilton's department to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. As I walked back toward the elevator, my cardboard box of personal belongings under my arm, I couldn't help but smile. Hamilton's office was on this floor, just down the hall from Chen's. I wondered if he knew yet what had happened, if he'd figured out that his scheme had not only failed but had actually accelerated my career advancement. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the 32nd floor where my desk was waiting. As the floors counted down, I thought about the irony of the situation. Hamilton had tried to destroy me professionally, only to end up handing me the biggest promotion of my career. But as the elevator reached my floor and the doors opened, I realized that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my new office, reviewing the Morrison Industries implementation timeline when Lisa knocked on my door. My office was smaller than Hamilton's had been, but the view of Elliott Bay was spectacular, and more importantly, it came with a door I could close and the kind of privacy that senior directors required. You need to see this, Lisa said, holding up her phone. It's all over LinkedIn. I looked at her screen and felt my stomach drop. The headline read, Pinnacle Solutions VP takes early retirement amid internal restructuring. Below it was a professionally written announcement about Jonathan Hamilton's decision to pursue new opportunities after many successful years with the company. But it was the comments section that made Lisa's eyes shine with barely contained excitement. Look at this one, she said, scrolling down to a comment from someone at Morrison Industries. Former Pinnacle VP attempted to take credit for work performed by other team members. Professional and ethical concerns led to early departure. Another comment, this one from a former Pinnacle employee who had left the company 2 years earlier. Not surprised. Hamilton had a reputation for claiming other people's successes while deflecting responsibility for failures. I handed the phone back to Lisa and leaned back in my chair. Through my window, I could see the afternoon ferry making its way across the bay toward Bainbridge Island, its wake creating V-shaped ripples in the dark water. How did this all come out? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Chin launched a full investigation into Hamilton's department after your situation, Lisa replied. Turns out you weren't the first person he tried to sabotage. They found documentation of at least 3 other cases where he'd taken credit for subordinates' work or undermined their relationships with clients. She sat down in the chair across from my desk and lowered her voice. But here's the really crazy part. Apparently, Morrison Industries wasn't just threatening to walk away. They were so impressed with how you'd handled the entire situation that they're recommending Pinnacle to other companies in their industry network. Chin thinks we might land 3 or 4 new major contracts as a direct result. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number on the screen was one I'd come to know well over the past 3 weeks. Morrison Industries. I should take this, I told Lisa, who nodded and stepped out of my office, closing the door behind her. Good afternoon, Mr. Morrison. I hope you don't mind me calling directly, Morrison said, his Chicago accent warm with satisfaction. I wanted to give you a heads up about something. We just signed 2 of our suppliers up with Pinnacle Solutions, and I specifically requested that you handle both accounts. I pulled out my notebook, the same one I'd been using to document everything since that morning 3 weeks ago when my career had imploded and then resurrected itself. That's wonderful news. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Both companies want to start immediately. We're talking about another $8 million in combined contract value over the next 2 years. Morrison paused and I could hear him shuffling papers in the background. But there's something else I wanted to discuss with you. I waited, pen poised over my notebook. I've been thinking about what happened to you at Pinnacle, How that Hamilton character tried to destroy your career? Morrison continued. It got me wondering how many other talented people get pushed out of companies because of office politics and incompetent management. It happens more than people realize, I said. That's what I figured. So here's what I'm thinking. Morrison Industries is growing rapidly, and we're going to need to bring more consulting services in-house over the next few years. Would you be interested in discussing a position here? I'm talking about heading up our new strategic development division. I set my pen down and stared out at the bay. A seaplane was taking off from the harbor, climbing into the gray Seattle sky toward destinations unknown. The offer was tempting, incredibly tempting. Working directly for Morrison would mean leaving the corporate consulting world behind, but it would also mean security, autonomy, and the chance to build something from the ground up. Mr. Morrison, I'm flattered, but I'm not sure I'm ready to leave Pinnacle just yet, I said finally. I feel like I have some unfinished business here. I figured you might say that, Morrison replied with a chuckle. The offer stands indefinitely. You've got my complete confidence, and frankly, after watching how you handled an impossible situation with grace and professionalism, I'd hire you for just about any position in my company. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, watching the Seattle afternoon unfold outside my window. The rain had stopped and patches of blue sky were beginning to appear between the clouds. People were emerging from buildings and coffee shops, squinting in the unexpected sunshine. My computer chimed with an incoming email. The sender was Margaret Chin, and the subject line read, Board Meeting Follow-Up. I opened the email and read, Following yesterday's board meeting, I wanted to update you on several developments. First, the board unanimously approved your promotion to senior director and the restructuring of the client relations department. Second, Morrison Industries has been selected as our client of the year, with special recognition for the partnership development work you led. Third, we'll be implementing new protocols for performance evaluation and promotion to ensure that political manipulation cannot interfere with merit-based advancement. I want to personally thank you for your professionalism throughout this difficult situation. Your handling of the crisis not only saved a crucial client relationship but also helped us identify and address serious cultural issues within our organization. Margaret. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. 6 months ago, I was a mid-level account manager reporting to Jonathan Hamilton and hoping for a promotion that might never come. Now I was a senior director reporting directly to the CEO, managing the largest client in company history, and fielding job offers from other companies. But more than that, I'd learned something valuable about standing up for yourself when the system tries to crush you. Hamilton had counted on me to disappear quietly, to accept his version of events and slink away without making waves. He'd underestimated the power of honest relationships and professional integrity. There was a knock on my door and Lisa poked her head in again. Sorry to bother you, but there's someone here to see you, she said. Says he used to work here. I looked past her to see Frank, the security guard who had escorted me out of the building 3 weeks earlier. He was holding a small wrapped package and wearing a smile that stretched from ear to ear. Frank, what are you doing up here? Heard about your promotion, he said, stepping into my office and setting the package on my desk. Wanted to congratulate you proper. 20 years I've been working security in this building, and I've never seen anything like what happened to you. I unwrapped the package to find a small framed photo, the Seattle skyline at sunset, taken from what looked like Cary Park. The Space Needle gleamed in the foreground, with downtown stretching out behind it toward the water. My daughter took that picture, Frank explained. Thought you might like something to remind you that even when things look dark, the sun always comes up again. As Frank left my office and I placed the photo on my desk next to my computer, I realized he was right. The sun had indeed come up again, brighter than I could have imagined. My phone rang again, and this time it was Lisa calling from her desk just outside my office. There's a call holding for you on line 3, she said. It's someone from Business Weekly magazine. They want to interview you about corporate ethics and client relationship management. I looked out my window one more time, watching the Seattle afternoon settle into evening. The city lights were beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, each one representing someone's dream, someone's ambition, someone's story of struggle and triumph. Tell them I'll call back in the morning, I said. I have a report to finish for Morrison Industries. As I turned back to my computer and opened the implementation timeline I'd been working on, I couldn't help but smile. Hamilton had tried to write the ending to my story, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail. The best stories are never really over, they just begin new chapters. And this chapter was going to be extraordinary. I pulled out my notebook one more time and wrote a single line at the bottom of the page. Sometimes the biggest betrayal leads to the greatest opportunity. Then I closed the notebook, saved my work, and headed home to my apartment overlooking Pike Place Market, where I planned to spend the evening planning my next move in a career that had been reborn from the ashes of corporate sabotage. The sun was setting over Elliott Bay as I left the Pinnacle Solutions building, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the glass towers of downtown Seattle. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new stories to tell. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, I was going home as exactly who I was meant to be. A professional who had proven that integrity and competence could triumph over politics and manipulation. The city hummed with possibility around me as I walked toward my car, my footsteps echoing off the wet pavement, carrying me toward whatever came next.